I'm going to let Alessandra talk about her research in general. I think she's prepared a couple of slides and hope that you enjoy it. I'm quite excited to have you here. The floor is yours.
So thanks a lot, Almudena, for introducing me and to have me here for quite some time. So given that I'll be visiting, I thought that before entering, let's say, the topic for today, I just tell you something about my broader research agenda so that we can identify whether there's anything that we can connect in the next weeks. So I think that there are two keywords in my research. One is inequality, and in particular gender inequality, and the other one is policy. And I'm generally interested in understanding how women fare in the labor market. And in particular, I'm interested in the interaction between what happens at the firm level and what happens in terms of women's decisions. And so I have a paper which uses administrative data and try to understand, for instance, firm pay policy and how they influence the gender pay gap. I have one paper still using this administrative data from the Social Security Administration. You can think of it as one of the papers in the child penalty literature. We focus on Italy. We try to understand how motherhood affects the career path of mothers versus non-mothers. Again, focusing in particular on how firms' characteristics mediate the effects of motherhood on women's career. And in terms of policies, lately I've been engaged quite a bit in trying to understand how some policy reforms, some policy change affect women's empowerment, when they can support it and when they can get funded. So I have a paper which looks, for instance, at a change in unemployment benefits to see whether when unemployment benefits become more generous, what happens to women's choices and then to their co-workers in the firm. And another paper which exploits instead a change in the parental leave policy. So think of it as setting. And again, with the goal of understanding what happens to mothers and fathers, but also to their peers in the firm. And this paper makes use mainly of administrative data from the Social Security Administration. And more recently, I've also started using some survey data and try to implement some information experiment where I try to understand how much people know about gender inequality, and in particular, whether it makes a difference if you know that gender inequality is a phenomenon that just affects the labor market, or whether you realize that this inequality then keeps on influencing your life trajectories even when you are in old age. And try to understand whether providing information about gender inequality over the life cycle changes perceptions on how important it is to reduce gender inequality, and also on policies, support for policies that can help in this direction. So this is just, let's say, the research related to the broad presence of women in the labor market. And then I'm also interested in focusing on what happens at women in top positions, or if you want, elite professions. And my first love, so to speak, was politicians. So again, there I try to analyze what happens when there are policy changes which tend to, which have the goal to promote female political empowerment, and what happens. And I try to document also the presence of women at the top of the income distribution. And more recently, I've started working on academia, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. And so here the focus is, as I said, on the underrepresentation of women in academia in general and in economics in particular. And there are two, let's say, features which characterize the research in this context. The first one is that we, with some co-authors, we are trying to build some novel data sets which comprise a large sample of job market candidates. And the other aspect which characterizes this research is that we are using Texas data as the key source of information. So we have a first paper in which we had access to reference letters to explore the presence of gender stereotypes in how female and male candidates are described by their advisor in the reference letters, and how this influences the career success of female and male candidates in the academic labor market. And the paper I'm going to talk about today, again, exploit text. And here the text that we are using is paper abstracts. And the idea is to try and explore whether the research similarity between junior and senior academics can have some influence in the career success of the junior academics. So this is just, I mean, a very quick overview of what I've been doing in the last years, what I'm still doing. The last bit of information I wanted to share with you is that recently we have launched at Bocconi a lab on social inclusion. So it's social inclusion lab, and Lucinda knows about it. And so I'm also starting developing some research which is more related to social inclusion rather than, let's say, gender inequality. So I guess I can learn from some of you also on this topic. So I'm done with my brief overview about what I'm doing, and I'm sure that we will have further chance to talk to each other in the next week. And so let me start and go into the paper of today. So the starting point is maybe something you are already aware of, and it is this. I can start from this figure from a paper by Oriol and co-authors, which documents a global gender imbalance in economics in research institutions. So the idea is that basically women are a minority, if you want, in economics. And this is not just limited to, say, Europe or North America, but it seems to span the entire world. And we also know that this underrepresentation becomes stronger the more we move up and look at senior physicians. And one of the reasons why we may be interested or concerned about this is the one that I report here from a paper by Bayer and Rouse, because I think it speaks quite a bit to what I'm going to talk to you about today. The idea is that this female underrepresentation may limit the questions asked and the identification of innovative perspective through which we can look at, let's say, usual or known problems. So starting from this, sorry. So in this paper, we study the extent to which research similarity between senior and junior researchers influences promotion in academia. We explore whether there are gender differences in research similarity, and then discuss the possible implication of our analysis for the gender diversity of faculty. How do we do it? So, as I already mentioned before, we build a novel data set in which we collect information on the universe of calls for assistant professor positions in economics in Italy. We collect the publication of the candidates to this call, the members of the selection committees, so those who have to decide whom to hire, and I'll give you the details of the institutional framework in a few slides. And we also collect information and publications of the faculty of the departments which are launching these codes, which are issuing these codes. And then we rely on tools from natural language processing, and in particular document embedding, applied to paper abstracts. And we try to propose a novel and granular measure of research similarity, which goes beyond, let's say, field of research. Let me try and tell you what the key idea is. So I think that Piera and Deborah, who are my two co-authors on this project, we started from this self-image bias idea. And in psychology, that is the tendency of people to assign greater weight to traits representing their strong points compared to traits representing their shortcomings. The self-image bias concept or idea, if you want, has been recently taken up also in economics. There is a paper by Sinistalchi and Veronesi, different vintages, 2021, 2023, in which what they argue is that evaluators use their own type as yardstick to assess other research. So the idea is that scholars may promote scholars with more similar research characteristics to their own. It is as if, let's say, a researcher evaluates more positively somebody who has a research style, research interest, or research methodologies which are aligned to their own, right? So we want to explore this idea of self-image bias. And in doing this, we observe that indeed there is heterogeneity by gender in field of study or field of research, even within economics. And we also know that senior academics, so those who are most likely to have to decide whom to hire, are men, right? So the idea is, think about a hiring decision and think about the fact that mostly men will be called to decide, so to speak, whom to hire, okay? And take into account that men and women may have different research interests. If people decide also according to this self-image bias, this may be a reason behind why we see underrepresentation of women in economics, okay? So I hope I was able to convey the idea that I will guide you through, but this is somehow what sparked our attention to research similarity and how to measure it and how to then understand its potential influence on career trajectories. So what do we find? What do we find? Let me give you a preview. So indeed, what we find is that research similarity between candidates and members of selection committees influences positively the probability of winning these competitions for tenure-track or senior assistant professorship, even when controlling for a rich set of candidate tactics. And let me say more about what we can do going forward. Besides influencing the probability of winning, it can also explain part of the gender gap that we observe in the probability of winning. We also show that male candidates are more likely to be strongly similar to one of the members of the selection committee, but this gender difference, or if you want to think of it as a sort of gender penalty for female candidates, disappear when, rather than looking at the entire selection committee, we only focus on female members of the selection. So this is what we find. Now, step by step, I try to explain how we do it and how we get it.
So, Alessandra, just a clarification about the general premise of it. So this is interesting because you have great data in economic setting as a field of study in academics. But can you just extrapolate this for general labor market setting? Because self-image bias should be just not prevalent among academics of one discipline, but any of the hiring process of any companies whatsoever. So
so I mean, at the moment, we just can try to explore whether this has any influence within this setting, but I'm not suggesting that this self-image bias, I mean, is important only for decisions in terms of hiring or promotion in the academic setting, but it may have also some very different type of context. But at the moment, we are just trying to establish here whether it has some influence, but I think it may be important also for broader labor market.
what is your prior? Do you think that it's more pronounced in an academic setting with this particular discipline in mind, or?
I don't think, I mean, what I know, if I remain, let's say, in the academic setting, is that economics is one of the fields in which we have the least diversity. So maybe what let's say, what I see here, okay, is stronger than what I would see in different fields. And actually, when I first presented this paper, there were some demographers and sociologists on the other side, and they said, why don't you do it for all the other subjects, okay? Okay, let me see whether we can collect the data to do that. Let's say, I mean, what I know from economics is that, and the other thing is that maybe in economics, now, let's say the senior positions are more pronouncedly in the hands of male professors. So maybe there can be a stronger impact on the decisions on who to hire and who to promote than what I could see in other disciplines where maybe the starting point is slightly less, let's say, unbalanced compared to economics. But I think that what we try to do here, if somebody is interested, could be applied to many different contexts. Okay, so briefly on the literature, I think that we can speak to the literature which looks at gender differences in research interests. It's what I mentioned before. We have evidence that men and women tend to focus on different fields within economics. You see more women say in labor and development compared to finance or quantitative fields. We can also connect to the literature which tries to show that there is gender bias in academia in general, for instance, in teaching evaluation, in the publication process, and the way scholars are cited, in reference letters, and also in seminar behavior. And we can also link our analysis to some of the papers which look at the role of the gender of the evaluator in the selection process for associate and full professors. We are not looking at associate and full professors, but we are starting from, let's say, the steps which is before the associate professor, and it's just this tenure-track. And also in the, let's say, the natural language processing literature, there are papers which focus on how to detect the stereotypes. And so I think that this is an environment in which we can apply their, let's say, their tools and try to understand, let's say, how things work. I think we can contribute along at least three lines. So the first one is just to develop this new and more granular measure of research similarity, which is based on the use of document embeddings applied to paper abstracts. And as I said before, I mean, this could be applied to, let's say, other contexts, not just that of economics. We can examine the role of self-image bias in hiring decisions. And the nice thing about our data is that we can observe the full candidate pool, so all the population that applied for this position. And we can also control for candidate mix effects. And last, we can provide evidence of gender difference in research similarity, and then discuss their implications for gender balance in academia. So now I'm just adding some flesh to the things that to the structure that I have just presented. So let me start from the institutional framework, because there are some things which are in common with the, let's say, international job market, and some things which maybe are more specific to Italy. So I'm going to tell you how it works in Italy. So the selection process or the selection procedure for assistant professorships in Italy, we have actually two steps. The first one is what we call junior assistant professorship, and the second one is senior assistant professorship. The second one is tenure-track, the first one is not. But the way in which the selection procedure run is the same irrespective of the level you focus on. Here I'm mainly focusing on senior assistant professorships, but as you will see, I also have data on junior assistant professorship, and I'll tell you how we are using this data. So the first step is that this selection relies on a publicly advertised. So the department that wants to hire an AP just has to publish, let's say, this call, and it goes into some books, and it goes online, and it's just open to all. There is a selection committee that is involved in the selection procedures, and it's composed of 3 scholars. One of them is the internal member, and by internal member, I mean a professor in the department that has decided to issue the protocol that requires the hiring. Okay? And then there are 2 external members, and they are, again, professors of other departments, of other universities, and they are randomly chosen from a restricted pool of professors, which are selected by the hiring department. So say LSE social policy wants to hire somebody, there will be a professor from LSE social policy that will be in this selection committee, and LSE social policy department will select a group of professors of other departments in UK universities or wherever. And from that pool, 2 further candidates in terms of professors will be randomly selected. And so we have a group of 3 individuals which will form the selection committee. Once we have this group, the selection committee, the hiring committee, the recruiting committee, I think I will call it in different ways, the selection goes through different steps. So the first thing that the selection committee has to do is to identify the criteria along which to evaluate the candidates. So for instance, how many points to give to the CV, how many points to give to the publications or to all the experiences that the candidate may have made. And this setting of the criteria is done before the list of candidates is known to the selection committee. Okay, so you just decide the broad rules according to which you will evaluate the candidates without knowing who the candidates are.
Alessandra, are they published to the candidates, the selection criteria? Do candidates know about
Not
them?
at the time they apply. Okay, so when they apply, they only know that Department X is searching for an AP, and they do not even know in which specific field. Okay, so the idea is that, no, don't laugh, I'm gonna be more specific in a while, but what the department can do is just to decide to advertise this call in 5 broad fields, which I report here. So there are, ministerially, there are these economics area, is a big one, so it's economics, broad economics. Economic policy, public economics, econometrics, and applied economics, okay? So what the department can do is just say, I need an AP in public economics, I need an AP in econometrics, I need an AP in economic policy. And what the candidate know is that the department is advertising a position in one of these.
The candidate doesn't know the selection committee either.
No. So this is something that I think I wrote, let's say, further down, but the committee is not known to the candidate at the time of the application. Maybe there is some, let's say, soft information related to who the internal member will be, because you know that it's, I don't know, the University of Milan. There is a position advertised in public economics, and the candidate can search for who the professors in public economics are at the University of Milan, but there's no certainty about, let's say, the specific person. Okay, so as I said, I mean, the selection committee identifies the criteria, and then it carries out the first screening according to the candidate CVs, and it shortlists 6 candidates, or at least 6 candidates. It shortlists more, but at least 6 candidates, and then the candidates who are shortlisted are interviewed by the selection committee, which then publishes a ranking and indicates the winning candidate. And as I was pointing out before, the composition of the committee is not public at the time the candidates apply for the position. So
is there any constraints on the nature of the applications that people have to put in? They have to, you know, a CV of no more than X pages, any statements of
No.
X.
Okay, generally,
All that is decided by the committee.
no, what they need to submit is just their CV, their list of publication, and all the information regarding, say, having attended seminars or conferences or the experience that they have, and whether they have a PhD, whether they do not have a PhD, and they communicate also, let's say, what type of position they are at the time of the application. But that goes mainly into the CV, and so it's just the CV, the list of publication. These are the 2 main, you don't need to write a motivation letter, for instance, or why you are specifically interested in going to that department.
Thank you.
So let me tell you a bit more about the data. So the first thing that we collect is information on all candidates, all the members of the selection committees, and also the members of the departments. And we do so for each call, which was opened in Italy in the period 2014-2021 in the economics areas, which I described before. So overall, we have approximately 250 calls for a senior assistant professorship. The label in Italian is RTB. And so we have 700 committee members and approximately 2,000, more than 2,000 candidates. Okay. Where do we collect this information? This is not centrally collected by, say, the ministry, but you need to go to each university website and see what type of call they have and who participated to the call, who the committee member was, and so on and so forth. So it was a bit, let's say, hard to collect all these things. What do we know about the candidates? We collect information on gender, the years from PhD, the publication list, the publications, the university of the PhD, the current position, And we also have, given that this is a public competition, we also have the score, which was earned by each of these candidates in the process. So it's not that we only know about who won, but we know the entire list of candidates, how they are ranked, and how many points or how many scores they got in the process.
Is it an aggregate rank, or can you identify which committee member ranked them which way?
No, it's just one, so it's you don't have a split between. Yes.
These 2,400 candidates are the full set of candidates, not just the ones who are shortlisted.
No, it's true, it's true.
So I have basically 10 candidates for 6 shortlisted.
It's slightly more, I have the descriptive. So the number of candidates per call is approximately 16. Okay, so, and take into account, so I mean, these numbers are very different from when we think about it in standard international job market, where the number is much larger. But take this into account. So first of all, we are looking at all the public universities in Italy. So you have the big ones and you have the small ones. So if you just look at the big ones, they say the State University of Milan or Bologna or La Sapienza, Roma, these numbers are larger. Okay? And the other thing is that it is not the case in Italy that you have just one call per year. Okay, so you can have more calls per year. So maybe it will never get to the numbers that LSE gets, say, I don't know, 500, 600, whatever. But if you sum the fact that you have more than one call in a year, you have a decent number of candidates. Please.
Okay.
So those 2,000 candidates, they are unique candidates. So there is no possibility that one candidate apply to multiple positions. And how do we deal with that?
This is just, I mean, this is we also take into account that these candidates can apply to more than one position. So this is not, I mean, these are the observations. There may be some repeated observations.
Okay, some might be okay.
Okay.
So given what you mentioned with the variation, do you have information on whether the department is hiring according to the traditional market, right, in terms of on the portal at that time of year, or these kind of hirings that you're mentioning like throughout the year?
I think that, I mean, let's say there are very few universities which hire according to the calendar of the economics job market, okay? And maybe these are the bigger ones, the ones that I mentioned before. But it's not necessarily the case that they are aligned and the calls are out, say, in November and you decide in January and so on and so forth. The information that we get here is just again from the university's institutional website, and in terms of publications, we use Scopus. We also have the information on gender and publications of each member of the selection committees and the faculty of departments launching the calls when hired in economics fields or areas. What do I mean by this? So assume that I'm in the social and political science department at Bocconi. By the way, Bocconi is not in this sample, but I mean, it's just to make an example. I'm an economist, and according to the ministerial classification, I am identified as an economist. So when I calculate these, let's say, when I look at the information on members of the department, I will focus on those who are assigned to the economics area. For instance, in my department, I also have, I don't know, statisticians, or I have people working in public administration. Those I am going to disregard. I'm just looking at those who are, at those professors who are in the economic fields. Yeah.
So Mubarak had a question, I think you.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, thanks. So, yeah, I thought you would come like afterwards. So in the note, you mentioned that from 2014 to 2021.
Yes.
So so there is possibility, I think it goes back to Margot's question, that a candidate can also apply twice in the same university.
Yes.
So, yeah, but the observation is cross-sectional, right? I mean, the way it is treated here.
I mean, no, because I know if the candidate is applying, say, 2014, 2015, 16, I know everything about who is applying. That's why I can also use the same candidate mix effect. Okay, I have repeated observation for a given candidate, but I can see whether, for instance, a candidate with certain characteristics applying to a certain call is more likely to win that one rather than another one. Okay.
Alessandra, this is great data, and I was wondering whether you could actually test what you have explained as a claim that these two members of the committee are selected at randomly.
Okay?
So you could compute the probability of certain people to be selected in the committee
Yes.
rather than
Yes, I
It's
can do
random or
that,
not.
but I mean, this is something that, I mean, if we could use, let's say, fully the random allocation of members to the committee, that would be good for our strategy. We know that most of the universities do random selection in a group, which is in any case, let's say, not that big. Okay, so it's not 20 people and you just randomly pick two. We are not exploiting in the paper this random variation in any case. So I know that that is the procedure that universities should follow, but in the empirical strategy that I'm setting up, I'm not exploiting the fact that there is random allocation in the selection committee. Okay. Here you see the number that we have. So in terms of methods, so we use, as I said, text analysis to make an abstract, and we measure similarity, or we calculate and measure research similarity between candidate and each member of the selection committee, and then candidate and each member of the departments launching the code, as long as, what I told you before, they are in the economics areas. And notice that, I mean, how do I do this? So this is what I want to get at, but similarity is calculated at the abstract level, at the publication, okay? So we do the following. So we use this document embeddings. Now, I don't know how, let's say, I'll try to explain what is the document embeddings here. So we have text, and we need to convert this text in numerical vectors. And the document embeddings is a methodology that allows us to give a vectorial representation of text data, okay? Why do I want to transform text into vectors? Because that's, let's say, what we are able to work with. And document embeddings is capable of transforming large texts into vectors. And the way it operates, the way it works is that texts which are semantically more similar lie closer, or are represented by vectors which lie closer to each other in the space. Okay, so assume that you have a paper abstract, and you want to represent that paper abstract as a vector. Document embedding does that for you. And the way it represents vectors in the space is such that those texts which are more semantically similar to each other lie closer in this vectorial space. Let me just add some further, let's say, details, and then I go back. So once I have this vectorial representation, I calculate, so think about vectors, you want to see how distant these vectors are. So what we use is cosine similarity. This is just a standard thing. Cosine similarities goes between -1 and 1. Think of it as a sort of correlation, right? And so we use this cosine similarity to capture similarity or distance between abstracts, okay? I just do one last thing, and then I come to your questions just to show you, let's say, what we get. So this is an example of abstracts coming from 2 papers. And what my document embedding tells me, and the calculation of cosine similarity tells me, is that these 2 texts are highly similar one to the other. So cosine similarity is 0.93. Remember that cosine similarity, when it is equal to 1, you are just an overlapping vector, so it's exactly the same abstract. So basically my measure is telling me that these 2 abstracts are highly similar one to the other. You can read it and just guess that maybe my measure is just capturing something which makes sense. I'm also making an example of something which instead is just described as not particularly, which is not very similar. So these are examples of 2 abstracts which are characterized by a low cosine similarity, 0.008. Notice that here we are looking at abstracts of scientific papers in economics. So although potentially cosine similarity can go between -1 and 1, it never goes below 1. Okay, so this is what I wanted to tell you, and now I'm open to the questions.
So the vectors, they are in binary or non-binary?
So the vectors, I mean, they are drawn in a space which has more than 700 dimensions. Okay, so that's what, I mean, I can't even imagine that, but I mean, so that's the
Not
type
by
of space that you have, that you need to have in mind.
What is the name of this process?
Document embeddings and the method, let's say the program that you use in order to do it is sentence transformers. Okay, so that's the methodology. Maybe her and then Lucinda.
I know it's just an algorithm and we can't always put in words what the algorithm is capturing, but I still wonder, is it capturing more of the semantic similarity, say the two people write similarly, or is it like content is similar? I guess like
Okay,
what
so-
exactly it is, especially say in view of maybe other algorithms for natural language.
Okay, so so we are not claiming, but we are saying that somehow this similarity captures similarity in research interests, research methodologies, or focus on.
So content, not like the
okay.
way you.
I mean, given this document embedding can also capture language similarities, okay? And so we received this question, but are you sure that you are capturing content similarities and not just, let's say, language similarities? So well, I showed you some abstracts before where I think that I'm doing I'm capturing something related to content. And then there are two further things that we can say to this. So the first one is, there may be a difference in the language use between non-native speakers and native speakers. Here, most of our candidates are non-English native speakers and all the abstracts are in English. So I think that somehow we shouldn't capture differences in, say, the ability of writing things rather than what I'm writing about, because the proficiency should be somehow homogeneously distributed among all the non-native English speakers. So this is just the first thing that I can say. The second thing that I can say is that, it's papers, scientific papers, and it is abstract of scientific papers. So I think that maybe some style differences, but after all, I'm not comparing, let's say, texts which have very different purpose or very different goals. So I think that comparing these type of texts should be less problematic in terms of capturing language differences compared to other types of texts. The other thing we tried was just to try whether there is a difference between these similarities. If I look at, say, econometrics, where I guess that there's more, let's say, technical language compared to economics, and I do not see any difference in the distribution of similarity if I focus, say, on econometrics compared to the other four fields I mentioned before, where maybe language is less standardized than the one you see in econometrics. Having said this, document embedding can also capture language differences, so I cannot exclude it completely, but I think that the evidence that we have is somehow reassuring that we are capturing content differences or content similarities.
Just so you made it clear in your answer to that question that you were only looking at English language publications,
Yes.
but presumably both some of the people in the departments and some of the candidates will also be publishing in Italian,
Yes.
and so they may have very strong connections. So you're missing that potential connection.
The connection you mean across the
They may have similarity in topics
written in Italian.
within Italian publications.
Maybe at the same time, we are using Scopus as a source of information for the publications, and so it's not the case that you have many Italian publications that may sit to Scopus, so to speak. So I understand that I may leave something out, but I don't have a better source.
But you're not doing this for Italian language publications.
I'm not doing it for papers written in Italian.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it. No.
So the members of the committee, I'm guessing they have, 50 papers published, 100 papers published. Are you using all the abstracts and comparing them to all the abstracts of the country?
Yes, I'm doing two different things. Let's say in the main analysis, I'm using all the publications of the selection committee up to the time of the call, and all the selections of the candidate, which are clearly generally fewer, up to the moment of the.
And is it an average or
And-
similarity?
I haven't said that yet, so I need to get the down here. But in the robustness, I also try to look only at the publication in the last 10 years for the committee or in the last 5 years for the committee, and we do not find any difference basically.
Could all of this be avoided if you use keywords, for example, rather than abstracts?
Yeah, but if you tell a computing scientist that you want to use keywords rather than the entire information that you have from abstract, they are not very happy. Okay, so, but I mean, potentially, yes. But I think that, I mean, if I can use the entire text of the abstract, I will capture keywords and also something else.
But you
So-
can easily check that, you
Yeah,
know, speaking to the robustness of whether you're capturing the content.
Yes, so
that could be
I can do it also with the, I mean, this would be done also with the keywords. Yes, it can be done, and it could be less robustness just to see that
Yeah.
that's content rather than language. Yes.
Any reason why you're not capturing these sentiments? In the abstracts only, we are focusing on the content.
No, I mean, what I can say is what I told you before. I cannot completely say this is sentiment, this is language, and this is, let's say, content. So what I think is that in terms of sentiment, maybe in the abstract, maybe they can contain some. But I mean, there's no way I can say this is related to one, the other, or the other. So I'm capturing them all. And I think I'm also capturing content, and I'm trying to argue that the role that, say, language or sentiment may have in the type of text that we are focusing on should play a lower role or a smaller role compared to the role of content. Then, I mean, that's as much as I can do. Yeah.
But I guess so, because the concern is, right, that maybe you're capturing something about candidate quality, right, rather than content, and there's a kind of matching process going on there.
But
But you could do these kind of measures of readability and things like this as like a thing to adjust for as a robustness check, right? So that you're kind of partialing out those and then comparing the content.
I mean, I'm when you see the regression, when I get there, I will have all the controls related to language.
Okay, sure. No, but I mean also the checks as well, right?
No, I don't know what to do down here.
Should we go on?
I told Alessandra that only clarifying questions, not, this is not an economic, but I saw that, you know, the room.
We're interested.
So only clarifying questions.
From now on. I'm happy to.
Yes, you have until 2:30, so I let you, I let you run the seminar.
So just going back to the application process, you said that candidates don't need to write a motivation letter, just a CV. Can you just tell us quickly how these CVs look like? Are they like a very standard, very short format, or can candidates maybe add to that, maybe write a bit about their research interests, or maybe write a sentence about kind of the contribution of their paper?
No, I mean, what they generally do in the CV is just they say maybe their main field of research, and then they report the abstract of their publications, but never I mean, in the CV, you don't comment on, let's say, my contribution in this field is this and that. So it's really somehow standard. So you just do your education path, your professional path. And if you want, you have the abstracts of the publication besides the list of publication. But that's basically what you are. I mean, we need to follow some ministerial guidelines in assigning these points, and you can assign points to say, this guy got some research funds. So if you have some research funds, that's something that you have in the CV. Or you can say, I attended this conference, but nothing more about, let's say, motivation letter or anything. Okay, no, I cannot go there. So I still read this last part, which is somebody asked about the mirror. So as I said, I mean, these cosine similarities or distances are calculated at the abstract level. So I need to aggregate them. And what I do is just to aggregate at candidate level the measure of similarity that we obtain at the abstract publication level in 2 ways. So one indicator that we use is the mean similarity. And in that case, what I'm doing is just to calculate the average similarity between the candidate and the members of the selection committee or the department, if when I'm interested in looking at similarity with members of the department, but this is not, let's say, my main focus. And I also look at the maximum similarity. So I just look for the score, if you want, the highest score between the candidate and one member of the selection committee or. So this will be my two indicators. Quickly on the descriptive statistics, so you see here that women are approximately 36% of all those applying. The probability of winning is approximately 10%. You apply to this type of position more or less 7 years after you have the PhD, so it's not something you apply to as soon as you say finish graduate school, and I've already commented on this number related to candidate. And if you look at the share of women in the committees and share of women in the departments, we are around 31-33%. We actually do not have a lot of variability over the 7-year period that we focus. You may be interested in looking at these and other data by gender. And so here we first look at, say, the probability of women. I have already told you before, and you see that there doesn't seem to be any difference between men and women. Now, before winning, you need to be shortlisted. And again, here there's no difference, but it seems that when women are shortlisted, they are more likely to attend the interview compared to men. And in terms of years from PhD, we see that women are applying to these positions later than men are. And when they do so, they also do it with a slightly better record in terms of publication. So women have a higher number of publication in A+ compared to men. So once we see this, we said, okay, so before moving to the analysis of the role of research similarity, which is the main goal, perhaps we need to understand a bit better whether the choice that men and women take when applying to these positions is different. And so let me just take a break, so to speak, before moving to, again, the research similarity. And let me discuss a bit about whether there are differences between men and women in selecting into participation to these AP professorships. So the first thing we do is, do we see fewer women there, 35%, because they are less likely to apply to this position. So it's just that they self-select less into applying for these positions. And so we analyze this by doing the following. So consider that I'm a candidate and I'm applying to a position in 2014 at a given university. I could have applied to any other call in 2014 and to any other call in the year after until I win something. So I assign, build a dummy, and I assign a value of 1 to the fact that I have really applied to that call, and a 0 if I haven't applied, okay? And if I do this, so if I build this sort of pseudo panel, what I find is the following. So controlling for some of the characteristics which may reflect the quality of the candidate, and also some fixed effect, both if I have call fixed effect or if I have sector and year fixed effect, what I see is that women are less likely to apply to AP positions. Okay, so I see them less because it seems that they are less likely to apply. But then we also wonder, okay, they are less likely to apply, but is it because they don't want to apply, or is it because it's harder for them to win at the previous step of the ladder, of the academic ladder? And so the other thing that we do is just to try and understand whether women are less likely to win calls for junior assistant professorship. So the previous step, the one that you generally go through before getting to tenure-track assistant professor positions. And here, let me just show you this. If I just do some descriptive related to the junior assistant professor positions, I see that here women are more, higher share compared to senior assistant professorship, not a big difference, but 36%, and here it's 40%. And the other thing I can show is that if we look again by gender, what I see is that here I have a difference, at least descriptively, and then I come to your question, okay, that women are less likely to win, right? And the other thing that's basically the only significant difference that I can find, apart from the fact that they are less likely to be approved at the time they apply. So it seems that here I have a difference between the likelihood that men and women win the previous step of the academic career. And indeed, I mean, if I run this regression and try to understand what happens, what I see is that indeed women are less likely to win a junior assistant professorship. So maybe I see fewer women at the senior assistant professorship, both because maybe they apply less, but also because they tend to be less in the position to apply for this type of professorships. Okay? You have questions?
Yes, so you show us a lot of means and averages and how much skewness in the data in terms of spatial distribution of these things. Women wouldn't be moving to smaller towns, perhaps. Their partners are in bigger cities. So if the applications and jobs are concentrated in a few hubs, that you will see some of these patterns are masked away with the averages.
So I don't have it in the slides, we have it in the paper. What we do is just to try and understand whether there are differences in the application probability depending on the geography of the calls, okay? And so what we see is that indeed it is less likely that women apply to positions in, at the same time, Central and Southern Europe. So maybe there is some mobility within Northern Europe, but it is less likely that women apply both to Central and Southern applications or calls in Central and Southern Italy universities. So there is some indication that women may be less mobile, and so they are somehow less, let's say, more selective into their application pattern, which is consistent with what I was showing you before. And so partly this selection into application may be explained, if you want, by this less, let's say, willingness to go across the country, so to speak, okay? But it's also the case that they are less likely to win at the previous stage. So it's just the combination of these two things. Yes.
Is it possible to apply straight to the senior assistant professor and not do the junior one?
It is, but
And are men more likely to do that, more likely to just skip the junior rule?
yeah, that could, I mean, it could be that, I mean, you see more women at the junior step because they go through that, and perhaps men don't. You can apply straight. It's not necessary that you go through the previous step in order to apply to the second one, but the requirements that you need to satisfy in order to get a senior assistant professorships are higher compared to the ones that you have as a junior assistant. So last two pieces again, and then I hopefully move to the main table with the research similarity. This is another important point, we think. It's just that I showed you before descriptively that women are more likely to participate to interviews once they are shortlisted, okay? And so here, what I show you, again, leading research similarity on one side, is just here, it's the probability of winning. This is the probability of being shortlisted. And you see that there is no gender difference between the two, between men and women regarding the winning probability and the shortlisted probability. But when it comes to the probability of being present at the interview, then it seems that women are more likely to be present at the interview. So we think that this is an important thing to take into account. And so what we do is just think about the different steps. So the first step is that you need to apply. Okay. Then once you apply, you need to be shortlisted. So what we do is just to estimate the probability of being shortlisted using all these controls that I showed to you, and adding to this the number of call you apply. So once I have this probability of being shortlisted, I use it, this predicted probability, to explain the probability of participating to the interview, so being present at the interview. And then I use the probability of being present at the interview, think about a 3 steps procedure to estimate the probability of winning. And if I do this, what I find is the following. So once I take into account the fact that women are more likely to attend the interview, clearly if you don't go to the interview, you cannot win. But once I take into account that women are more likely to attend the interview, what I find is that there is a gender gap in the probability of winning, which I do not see if I do not take into account the fact that women are more likely to go to the interview when they are shortlisted. Okay, so I keep this in mind, and I now move to analyzing the role of research similarity. First thing, I'm gonna show you whether research similarity influences the probability of winning. I try to see whether research similarity can contribute to explain the gender gap that I have just shown you. And then I want to see whether research similarity differs across gender of the candidate. And the type of regression that I'm running is the following one. So here it's just the probability of winning for candidate I in column J in broad field S. Here the broad fields are economics, economic policy, public economics, applied economics and econometrics, and ERT. And here I need to aggregate further, but I will go back to this in a few slides. We actually use a dummy in order to capture similarity. So this dummy will be equal to 1 if the similarity index, which I can measure both as a mean or as a max, as I showed you before, is above median and 0 otherwise. And then I have xi, which is a vector of candidate characteristics, where I have, as I said before, the gender, the number of years for PhD, whether you have a PhD from abroad, the number of publication and the type, A top 6, interdisciplinary, A+, A, where you are now. When you are an internal candidate, meaning that you are applying to this senior assistant professor position, having a position in the university where you are applying to. And then we also check whether you are a co-author of one of the members of the selection committee. I have a sector and year fixed effect, and in some specifications, and maybe the most restricted one is the one with candidate fixed effect. I can have candidate fixed effect or co fixed effect. So this is just look a bit small, but I'm gonna try and attract your attention in some main things. So what am I asking here is similarity related to the probability of winning one of these competitions for senior assistant professorship? In the first 3 columns, I use similarity based on the mean similarity. And in the last 3 columns, I measure similarity based on the maximum similarity. So these 2 indices which I described to you. Irrespective of whether I measure similarity looking at the mean between the candidate and the selection committee, or the max between the candidate and one of the member of the selection committee, what I find is that similarity influences positively the probability of winning the selection. And this is the case also in this column here and this column here, which are the ones where I use candidate fixed. So basically, even with candidate fixed effect, is that the candidate is more likely to win that candidate, that precise candidate, in competitions in which he or she is more similar to people, to professors in the selection committee. So this is the first thing I wanted to highlight. The second one is that, well, there are other variables which are relevant. So you see here that this is having a high number of A+ publications increases the likelihood that you will win. And also being a co-author of somebody who is in the selection committee helps you. But even when I control, even if I control for co-authorship, it seems the similarity, let's say, plays a role on top of having a co-author in the selection committee. The second thing I would like to show you is the same regression that you saw in the previous table, but here I take into account the fact that women are more likely to be present at the interview that I showed you before. And when I include the probability of being present at the interview, remembering that this is different according to gender, I still see that being similar as a candidate to the selection committee helps in increasing, if you want, or influences positively the probability of winning, but I also start seeing a gender gap. Okay, so here is where women are actually, say, less likely to win. But now I don't have it on the same slide, and so this may be, I mean, I still have to find a way to show this better, but these coefficient here of the female dummy are smaller than the one I showed you before, meaning that somehow the similarity helps partly explain why, let's say, the gender gap in the probability of winning. So these are, let's say, the two main results for the first part. Now I'm going to tell you what type of robustness we have done. And the first one I've already mentioned because I had a question on this. The idea is that nothing changes if I look at the similarity with the most recent publication of members of the selection committee. Another thing we did, and this is, let's say, relatively recent, so maybe I show this to you. It's just the top part here. You saw before that we are using co-authorship as a control. Here, what we do is rather than looking at straight co-authorship between the candidate and members of the selection committee, we check whether they have a co-author in common. Okay, so say I write with Paula, Almudena write with Paula. So in that case, we would be part of the same network. So I'm controlling for that. And even if I control for being in the same network, it is still the case that similarity seems to influence positively the probability of winning. Another robustness that we do is, okay, but maybe the similarity with the committee captures actually the similarity with the department. Okay, so the idea is that the department is after some candidates with specific characteristics, and so this is what we are capturing. So here I introduce the dummy similarity with the department, okay, on top of the similarity with the selection committee, and I still see that basically the similarity with the selection committee is positive and it remains significant, whereas basically the similarity with the department doesn't seem to play a very important role here. Another thing that we try to do is to control for citations of the candidate as a further indicator of the quality of the candidate. And again, the dummy similarity stay there. And it is positively related to the probability of winning, you see here. And the other thing we do is, okay, but maybe these broad fields that are that I described before are too broad. So what we did was just to rely on the gel codes of the publications for those publications which have a gel code and assign to each candidate a narrow field. So even when we control for the narrow field of the candidate, it is still the case that similarity plays a role. Last robustness I mentioned, maybe internal candidates are a separate species somehow, and so maybe they know more, and we try to look at the candidate where we do not have internal candidates. And it's still the case that similarity plays a role in influencing the probability of winning. We do not find any evidence that the role of similarity in the probability of winning is different by gender. When I try some interaction with gender and similarity, I don't find anything. And also there are not seem to be big differences across the broad fields that I mentioned before. So far, I think I showed you that similarity influences the probability of winning. Now I want to see whether similarity differs across candidates of different gender. So I've changed my equation, my estimation equation. Here I have my dummy similarity as a dependent variable, and I'm interested in seeing whether male or female candidates are differently similar to the selection committee. And what we find, it's here. So the first three columns, again, rely on the dummy similarity based on the mean. And the last three columns rely on the dummy similarity based on the maximum similarity. So basically, we do not see any difference between men and women in terms of average similarity with member of the selection committee. But we see that there is some difference between men and women in terms of the maximum similarity with the member of the committee. What does it mean? It means that for men, it is more likely that they are highly similar to somebody in the committee compared to women. The last thing that we do is, okay, but let's try and split between male and female members of the selection committee to see whether this gender gap that I've just shown differ depending on whether I focus just on the female members of the committee or on the male members of the committees. And actually, what we find here is that when I only focus on female members of the committee, I do not see any gender difference in similarity. And so the gender difference in similarity seems to mainly be driven or influenced by male members of the committees. Okay, so the point is that the gender gap seems to appear because of the male members of the selection committees rather than, say, the female members of the selection committees. So I think I'm almost done. I don't know whether it's time to summarize and then maybe discuss and conclude. So we have tried to provide evidence on the role of research similarity in academia and discuss its influence on female underrepresentation. We have collected data on the universe of calls for assistance in Italy, and we have seen that the similarity in research styles, characteristics, agendas is related with the winning probability, and that these results are robust, controlling for authorship, research network, and they do not differ across the broad field. We have also seen that research similarity partly explains the gender gap in the winning probability, and that men and women differ in terms of similarity. And women are less likely to be highly similar to a member of the selection committee. So discussion, part of it we have already done because I had the part in language, so we can skip this, but let me try to discuss a few more points. So one question maybe, our selection, or at least these are the ones that come to our mind or that have come to the mind of those who have listened to the presentation before, maybe you have further comments. So maybe selection committees are acting upon the input of departments who want to hire senior IPs with specific research profiles, and it's not a solid self-image bias, okay? So what can we answer? What type of evidence can we bring to this? So the first thing we thought, okay, if it's a story of department, then what we would expect is that internal members of the selection committee are the ones that matter the most because they somehow carry the interest of the department. But what we see is that research similarity is important in explaining the winning probability, even when we exclude the internal members of the committees. The second piece of evidence that we can bring is that, well, we have tried to combine the dummy similarity related to committees with that related to departments, and what we see is that even when we control for similarity with the department, there seems to be an autonomous role of the selection committee. So this, again, for us, goes in the direction of saying that somehow it's not only a story of the department, okay? And then the last thing that we think is related to this question is our results on the role of similarity hold even within fields of research of the candidates. So it is as if take candidates in labor, the one who is more similar to the selection committee, that's the one who's going to win, okay? So this is why we think that we may have some evidence which goes in the direction of self-image bias rather than it's the role of the department. The other thing we thought about is, okay, but maybe there is some information that we cannot collect if you want from the CVs or anything, and maybe if you are a committee member and you are highly similar to somebody who you are judging, you are a better judge, okay? So you are better at identifying who the strongest candidates are. And so what we can say here is that our results hold also when we control for citations of the publications in the candidate at the time of evaluation, and this will be a measure, if you want, of quality, or further measure of quality of candidate. And the other thing that we can show is that if I take the winners with higher similarity to the members of the committee, ex post, they do not have more citation and are not more productive post-evaluation. So this seems to indicate that maybe it's not a matter of being better as a member of the selection committee to judge somebody who is close to what you do. Last part, we are somehow telling a story about the demand side of the labor market, self-image bias by but could it be that it is actually the supply side? And so for this, what we can say is that candidates do not know the composition of the selection committee at the time of the application. So it's not that I decide to go to that call because I expect that there will be somebody in that selection committee who does research related to mine. And maybe more importantly, when we try to see whether similarity matters for the decision to participate to the interview, once you are shortlisted, that doesn't play a role. So the idea is, okay, but maybe we are shortlisted and then, is it here? Yes. Shortlisted, you still have as a candidate a decision of shall I go or not to the interview? And maybe my choice of whether to go or not is influenced by how similar I feel to members of the selection committee. But here we find that the decision of attending the interview or taking part in the interview is not influenced by being similar to members of the selection committee. So this is somehow is an indication for us of the fact that it is more a demand side story rather than a supply side story. And I've discussed the part on whether research similarity captures closeness in language rather than in research agenda. So I think I'm ready to conclude. So our results suggest that research similarity can reinforce the tendency to conform to standardized research profiles. So I've stressed a bit the gender side, if you want, but it could be also interpreted more broadly that if we give a prize, so to speak, or we give a premium to research similarity, maybe we'll go back to the issue I mentioned at the beginning, that it is harder to promote broader research agendas, irrespective of the gender of the research. And in particular, however, when we focus on the gender aspect and we take into account that most of the evaluators are still male, the premium given to research similarity may hinder the career progress of female scholars or may promote those who have a research profile which is more in line, which is more conformant to those of, let's say, the senior group. On the policy side, I don't know whether we can push too far, but I mean, maybe we have an additional justification for implementing some affirmative action in the profession. At the same time, maybe it is important to establish transparent and objective criteria in the evaluation process. And maybe it's successful just to have, or to not impose, but I mean, guarantee a certain level of diversity and research interest among the members of hiring committees, if this can help, let's say, reducing the role of similarity in the selection process. So I'm done. Thank you very much.